Guys, it's lovely to see you. It's great to have you joining us today. Heidi's come all the way from New York City, and Sarah-Jayne's in south of France. So let's start by, if you could just introduce yourselves, tell us what you do, and then tell us something we don't know about you. Hiedi.
Hi, I'm Hiedi Cohen from the Actionable Marketing Guide. I'm coming to you from New York. And the one thing you might not know about me is that I'm an avid knitter, and I've traveled the world from Santiago, Chile, and the Atacama Desert to the Sacred Valley in Peru, all the way to Shetland Wool Week. And the one thing I've learned about influencers from the marketing, from knitting, is that they have a site called Ravelry, where the top influencers have actually make six-figure incomes based on being a member of that community. And in the process, they've also destroyed the publishing industry for knitting.
And what about you, Sarah-Jayne?
Well, okay, long story short, with me, started at stage school, dancing, singing, on stage, the works, young protege, then went off to university to study psychology, moved into the psychology of branding, became a technology influencer because I am married to an amazing technology man. We founded the influencers a few years ago. We now have a fantastic podcast. Plug. Tech Uncorked. Please take a listen to it. We break down technology for everybody. And yeah, influencer marketing is such an exciting area to be a part of. So it's really good to be here, Andrew.
It's really lovely to have you guys here. So let's start with our first question of how does B2B influencer marketing deliver value for businesses in your opinion? So Hiedi, maybe you want to take that first.
Okay, I believe that influencer marketing is really powerful. And it isn't as new. The current incarnation, is new. But this goes back for years, right? Who did people trust? They trust people that they know, not just anybody. They'll trust consumers generally, but it's friends and family. And this has been documented throughout the noughts. But what has happened now, influencer marketing has risen, partly attributable to the fact that you need some way of getting trust. The 2021 Edelman Trust Barometer shows that trust among consumers is at an all-time world record low. As a result, you need somebody to help you build trust. People might trust my company, but they don't trust companies in general. So the one thing you need to do is start building relationships so that and using influencers, whether they're in your company, they're your customers, or they're third-party influencers, to help build that trust and extend the relationship. And really critical in today's world is that it extends your customer experience. And that is really key, because you've got to think not just about the acquisition of your customer, since acquisition is an investment, but once you get somebody to buy, you need to do a very good job of customer success or onboarding, and then long-term retention, because as 2019 Gartner report on sales shows, that it's no longer, you can't just sell Mr. Big. You have to sell a team of 6 to 10 people, and they all have to agree.
Sure. And what about you, Sarah-Jayne?
Well, I think I completely agree with Hiedi, but I also think that as an influencer, you basically build the biggest coffee shop experience in the world. The more people that you connect with, the more that you're having this conversation with, because it's all about the conversation. You can't make a marketing message too staged. It's about being yourself, building on the experience. And as I say, it's like a coffee shop chat with people that know and trust you every day, and you build on that and you add things, and they think, actually, if Sarah's saying this, if Gratton Girl's saying this on Twitter, I'm going to look into this. I'm going to click on this link and take a look because she's excited by it. I'm likely to be excited by it. So it is the trust element, as Hiedi said, coupled with this kind of this longevity of friendship. You know, you can't be an influencer overnight. It doesn't happen overnight. You can't think, oh, I know everything about this, I'm going to be an influencer. That doesn't happen. It takes years and years of building relationships, building trust, and telling a story. It's about telling stories in an authentic way, using your own voice.
And obviously we're talking, you know, about B2B, you know, and there's obviously been a lot of case studies and a lot of good work we've heard earlier from Analytica and, you know, some really interesting sort of strategies that have been put in place. I mean, do you feel that's the same in terms of what we're doing in the B2B space? Because, you know, you talk about relationships, you talk about trust, you know, these are, you know, and personal recommendation, you know, these are things that brands, you know, have been doing for a long, long time, more, I guess, in the B2C space. So, you know, is this really right for brands in the B2B space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the two are becoming diluted. There's not this hard business edge anymore. It is all about relationships. I think when we started out, companies would contact somebody that was very hot on AI to talk about a new product and to give a perspective. Now we're beginning to learn more, especially since the pandemic, and we were all living for some length of time virtual lives, how important it is to connect virtually and to have a conversation virtually. I think the lines are slowly becoming blurred between B2C and B2B.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think what you're saying is right about the pandemic. You know, look at where we are today. You know, we're all talking virtually, we're talking around the world. Naturally, it's helped us become more connected and closer. We're all experiencing the same, whether we're in New York or France or in London. So, Hiedi, did you want to come in there?
Yes, I think that there's a different way I would frame this. I love Sarah-Jayne's points about stories, because stories, you know, relates to Chip and Dan. He's made to stick. People remember stories. It's what we've been, you know, brought up to do. So you can't just say facts, because people like looking at facts. They make your case is, you know, when you're making a business case. But the reality is people remember the stories. People remember what happens to them. And to better, I would frame what Sarah-Jayne has been saying in a different way. I would say that in the past, from like 2016 to 2021, we've been in the midst of what I call a seismic shift in marketing. There's been content is surplus. It's not just content shock. The way Mark Schaefer talked about it is content saturation. We've had a move, and accelerated by the pandemic, that you had technology increase of, let's say, 2 years and 2 months, according to the CEO of Microsoft. And third, so that's an AI factor. And thirdly, there's an increased use of voice. But on the consumer side, which goes to Sarah's point, is that there's no longer a digital divide. Everybody was forced to become digital.
Sure.
Secondly, people's lives and lifestyles have changed. You have work from home, which is why you've got more of a blurring between B2B and B2C, because your life hits up against, you don't have a commute time. Your life is hitting up against it. Your kids are knocking on the door at 5 o'clock, and lifestyles have changed. How I bought things, how I did things before. And lastly, that's related, and marketers don't like talking about this, is the need for, a real erosion, because we've now have this AI. We have less, everything is digital. What's happening to my information? So it's a privacy and security factor. As a result, there is a blurring. And to Sarah's point, because of this shift, McKinsey found that B2B marketers have had a massive move, across the whole buying process, from looking for information, pre-purchase support, purchase, onboarding, and retention, that they are actually willing to use digital means. That either means video conferencing or chat. And chat is both of those are forms of voice, and they will spend from $50,000 US to over $1 million, right? This changes the game. So it's not, and I would take Sarah-Jayne's point one step further. It's not a matter of being a coffee shop, because in the business environment, you don't worry about a coffee shop. It is people I know. And according to Edelman's 2021 trust barometer, which has been consistent. The most trusted person in your organization is your technical support people, which makes sense. Those are the people who your customers know. It's not like a buying team may not have end users on it, but your end users need those tech people, or your product doesn't work. And you have less than 90 to 100 days to get them up and doing it, because you've now got this whole team.
Exactly.
If it doesn't work, there's dissatisfaction, which never used to occur.
Exactly. And, they say that necessity is the mother of invention. The fact is we've had to do this. Let me just stop you there, because I want to just welcome Jeanette, who's just joined us from Berlin. It's great to see you.
How German of me, right? I'm so punctual.
I thought you would be here first, Jeanette, but hey, never mind. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Can you just quickly just do a very quick introduction and just tell everyone who you are, and then we'll just continue with the discussion.
Yeah, so my name is Jeanette Okwu. I have an agency called Beyond One that focuses on influencer marketing in all its facets. So B2B, B2C, B2C, B2B, B2C, you name it.
All the alphabet.
It's all there. It's all out there. And I've been in the space for over 15 years now, I think, even before we experience influencer or influence marketing as we know it today. And especially in the B2B area. And I agree with you, Hiedi, it's become blurred because what we call B2B is not clearly B2B, because there's always a a C, the end consumer, attached to that. So I agree also that with the information overflow that we experience right now, it's very hard for marketers to be heard. And the clock is always ticking, meaning the pressure is on and you need to close sales. But I think as it is with any customer journey, if you rush, it's not really authentic or true, or the buy-in is a bigger hurdle to take than doing influencing, which can come from really social media or platform influencers, but it could also be your employees and your ambassadors within the company that have influence in a smaller circle, or they have connection to bigger influencers. So that moves as well, right? So there's a connection there to be made between the company's workforce as well as to the bigger thought leaders in the B2B space. Because in the end, people don't buy from brand logos, they buy from people.
Of course. That's great. Thank you, Jeanette. Hiedi, you just wanted to have a comment on that.
Yeah, I was going to say I agree with Jeanette on that, but we have to, one thing I would like to say is, first of all, you have to understand in today's world, while marketers still talk about the buyer customer journey, going back to Gartner's research, it's this team of 6 to 10 people where everybody's voice is consistent. There's 6 processes. It's not necessarily we have that old-fashioned funnel. People can come and go at various points, and how you buy, which is why, we got to I think as marketers, we have to start thinking differently. We've been, especially in B2B, we've been like the support group off to the side. You have to actually take Peter Drucker's approach and integrate marketing across the board, because without seeing a holistic, which goes along with the fact that there's been an increase in technology, increased use of AI, that without a full view of your customer and having data from end to end, you can't prove where sales are coming from. I do leads. My influencer does leads. Influencer marketing is still a consistent part of people's marketing. They use a budget that can go, whether you go with nano, micro, or major influencers. But the problem is, to Jeanette's point, you need that relationship. It has to be relationship bound, and it has to be thought of, which is one of the reasons that things like account-based management have grown up.
Yeah, so I guess the point there is not to do it in isolation. It's got to be part of an integrated strategy and a solution that encapsulates lots of different touch points within the organization. Well, that's great. Let's move on to some of the brands that you've been thinking about. Who's doing good, great B2B influencer marketing? Can we just talk about some of those good examples? What do you think?
I can kick that off. We're talking
Okay.
about the work that I'm currently doing with Ericsson.
Okay.
They have a fantastic psychology behind their influencer marketing. It is community. It's working with the team, with those internal influencers within the company to build a conversation that basically we extend out. So it's from inside out. And it's passion. It's passion. The story is passion about what they're doing. You can't influence anybody if there isn't a modicule of passion behind what you're saying, and truth and integrity and yourself. So the great thing about Ericsson, and we are what I would like to call an ongoing, it doesn't stop. It's an ongoing influencer relationship. It's not like, well, we'll do this week. You'll do a bit here, Sarah, and then
evergreen strategy.
It's a conversation with the brand. It's a conversation with the businesses. It's a conversation with the world that this is what's going on here. We're excited about it because I'm excited about what I'm talking about for them because it excites me personally. Yeah. And I think, again, it comes back to what Hiedi and Jeanette have said. It's trust. It's being authentic, and it's working with a company that understand your voice and work with you and don't want to shift your voice for their message, because that's not going to work.
Well, that sounds great. I mean, and it sounds like they're very passionate about what they do as well. And,
incredibly passionate. We have WhatsApp groups, we have meetings, we even have like karaoke sessions with each other. That's that thing about clouds. Let's find a song about clouds and sing. Yeah.
And what about you, Hiedi? What brands can you sort of talk about in that respect?
Well, I think it's interesting that Sarah-Jayne brought up Ericsson, because I am very focused on voice these days. And I'd say 2 out of the 3 companies I think are doing a great job in terms of how they reach out and do influencers are Amazon in terms of their Alexa product, where they do an amazing job of making sure that from a customer perspective or a user, if you're creating an Alexa skill or you want to create voice content there, that they bring you on. But also from a developer perspective, they have an evangelist. They do developer outreach. And similarly, Google does that with their assistant. They have ambassadors, they have evangelists, they focus on getting people out there and using it. They're both products are active supporters and sponsors of the various global voice groups, as well as participating in co-creating content. The third one, right? And they have, I mean, here is something from an actual B2B marketer's perspective. They have global reach. These are 2 companies that have extensive base in digital and technology. They've been down this road. They kind of have a playbook from which they're starting. But that going one step further, and I think that this I would look at LinkedIn, which I believe has been doing this for more than 5 years. They brought in a man named Jason Miller, who had been there back in the early teens, and he created this whole process of how they've built out their content. When they first started publishing content on their site, they brought in an editor from one of the major business magazines. They've always selected their top influencers. They did the same thing again when they went to video, and they really worked to build out their community, not only internally, but with support. And they use agencies not necessarily to bring in their influencers, because they can tell, they have their analytics. They bring in the agencies to do some of the support in terms of how to create their content and building in a breadth of different voices.
Yeah. So it's a much smarter way of working. That's really interesting. What about you, Jeanette?
I have an example that is almost vintage, so to speak, because I experienced it myself years and years ago when I had a little startup, and we used back then it was fairly new, Microsoft Azure. So we got an evangelist on our side who really was helping us to leverage the product. And I thought that they back then, and I know that they have evolved and doing a much better job now than they did back then. They were really thorough in making sure that those evangelists are on top of each and every startup they have to take care of. There was a community already, and that was before 2010. In the meantime, I'm still in contact with that evangelist, and we've become friends. So this continues as it should, digitally as well as offline. And there are many other examples, but I do think that there are so many more opportunities to leverage that, even with the ones who are doing a stellar job. Because what we see, well, what we find ourselves in is that brands need to take on that publisher mentality and include their armada of employees and enthusiasts to give them ammunition, meaning give them content that they then in turn can, with their creative freedom, confidently edit and push out to the wider network that they have.
Yeah, and that's really important, because it is about organizations investing in that content as much as anything else. I mean, I've had lots of conversations with big financial brands, a lot of the banking brands, and I talk to the CMOs, and they say, we've got 140 people in one department creating reports and content, and wow, that's serious investment. Just before we get into a couple more points there, Hiedi, I've got a couple of questions I just want to see if we can put to you guys. So this is from Gordon. Thank you, Gordon. Gordon Glenister, of course. What share of total B2B marketing spend could influencer marketing be in the B2B space? Any thoughts on that? Go on, Hiedi.
I would say that the research shows, because I've looked up the research on this, the research goes from anywhere from about $50,000 to about $500,000.
Right.
So I would say I just like to clarify, because to Jeanette's point, that is just for influencers. That's the people you compensate, because people who are influencers are these are ones who are being compensated. In other words, they want some kind of financial remuneration for being out there and representing your brand, whether they're co-producing with you, they're part of your, B2B companies have done this for years. Before it was called influencer marketing, it was called conferences, right? But they are working with you and they bring that out. But to Jeanette's point about talking about content, it's not just the information in your company. And I think the one way that a B2B business needs to think about this more holistically, which is where, going back to my point that you have to be integrated, is content marketing cannot be a siloed function. In order to work effectively, you need information for every one of the tasks your buyer is going to do. And to save money, you want to start with the most information, which is usually onboarding, right? And then you create that and then adapt it for, let's say, buyers. And to what Marcus Sheridan is known for, his book says, they ask, you answer, is that you have to answer every single question. So that is where, and content can be a major function. It may report separately because it goes across your organization. It's not just marketing and sales, it's customer service, which is where you're going to get most of your questions from. It can be product.
So we're talking about communication stream here, and we're talking about big spend and increased spend now in B2B influencer marketing, up to an average of over £500,000 per year at the moment. And that's growing because there's more trust in influencer marketing. In terms of B2B, B2C, of course, has been there for a lot longer. And we're going back to that historical thing, Jeanette, aren't we? With people buying into what they know. It's that Ovaltinis. I remember the Ovaltinis commercial, and the very liquid, and the kind of the assurance and the trust in a brand, Heinz baked beans. But now Our trust is with people, the people that we trust to sell a message, a brand message.
Absolutely. You know, and I think, sorry to cut in there, but we were talking,
No.
I think Tim from Analytica was talking about it earlier, about, you know, you're paying someone to promote your products and services.
Exactly.
Should that be labeled as, you know, an ad or a commercial message?
I think that's a delicate subject. Sorry, Jeanette, just really quickly. But I mean, certainly with our clients, we tend to use the word ambassador. So, for example, we're going back to Ericsson. I'll do a message.
Yeah.
It's heartfelt, but I will add the hashtag Ericsson ambassador at the end, because it's full transparency. It's disclosure. Yes, we are being paid. However, people that know me, I don't take on a client whose message I don't believe in 100%, because it's detrimental to me as an influencer. So from an influencer perspective, I think it's important to be transparent really quickly. And then Jeanette, I also think it's important for the companies to share that transparency through their influencers.
Well, if you don't do it, you get found out anyway. So the implications.
I think so.
Exactly.
Exactly. It's a losing game. Yeah.
Again, again, it is a bit of a grey area in this sort of B2B space. I mean, we've done this in the consumer space with hashtag ad and other iterations of it. I think maybe some point we need to get this regulation coming into B2B as well.
I think we should just get over ourselves with this. I mean, you know, if you hide behind the bush that you are paid, then it becomes kind of iffy, right? And Sarah-Jayne, I applaud you for doing Ericsson Ambassador. For me, the most perfect or the most elegant example of a B2B product placement declaration is Jason Faltz, how he does this on his podcast, right? So it's clear that, and now here comes the product placement tag, media is sponsoring him, and he explains it, why he is doing this collaboration, and he gives product features, he tells a little story about it, and I'm okay with that. Because I know, like in your case, Sarah-Jayne, he would never publicly announce a collaboration if he doesn't stand behind the product. And I think as if we say, okay, I am supporting Ericsson, I am supporting Adobe, I'm supporting this because I believe in the product, and they believe in me, so we have joined forces.
Yeah, I think, and it's contextual, isn't it? It should add to the editorial integrity, you know, and I think that, you know, there's lots of lessons learned. Just another question from Gordon. He says, do you think there's a space for virtual influencers in the B2B space, like in B2C?
Well, I think a lot of us are virtual these days, and nobody sees us. Nobody sees me. I'm very virtual.
CVI.
That's a big yes.
I know. Well, I think, oh, that's such a question, Gordon. That's typical Gordon. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think there probably will be, you know, I mean, who do we know who's real in the virtual space in the future, which is quite sad, actually, really, because I like to think that our personality grounds us and makes us real and makes us who we are and makes us believable and builds trust. But who's to say through AI, there may be virtual influencers in the future that a company can just invest in and create. And you know, who's to say what's real and what isn't, which would be a real shame, I think.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, if you take a view at some other sectors like the gaming sector, where it's, you know, e-gaming has gone massive growth, platforms like Twitch, you know, people watching people playing games, you know, this whole virtual world, this is really an interesting one. So you know, let's move on to some of the trends that are emerging. Some trends you're seeing in the B2B influencer marketing space. What specifically are you seeing there? Hiedi, maybe we can start with you.
I think that there's a couple of trends, and they're growing from what's been said, right? Everybody here is talking about it. One, I'm going to go back to the seismic shift in marketing where there is a blurring, right? That goes to Gordon's question about virtual versus, B2B. And I think that there's a blurring between B2B and B2C. That doesn't mean that a B2B marketer can act like a B2C marketer. It just means that to Jeanette's point earlier about, Jason Falls doing what I would call an old-fashioned hand sell. He's not just promoting, he's saying why, he's putting his name there, but the fact that he's reading it, NPR has research that shows, let's say if you're on a podcast or on even terrestrial radio, if the announcers actually speak it, it has more credibility. It also prevents people. It's not like an ad that you would see on television where I can now fast forward through it because I've done some kind of time shifting. So I think that going back to what I said earlier, your consumer has changed. So particularly in the past year and a half, 2 years. So we have to actually meet the consumer. Marketers have to meet the consumer where they are, so that that they've changed, right? With all of this, with COVID, everybody being virtual, you have to think about who is still your customer, right? Are they still working there, right? There's been a lot of upheaval. Mm-hmm. In the United States, we've lost 20 to 25% of the women in the workforce. So is the person who was your customer before still your customer, right? Yeah. You have to think about that. How are they buying, right? So the McKinsey research, are they buying virtually or not? So that you have to be prepared to reach them. And it requires that you be there and provide what they need on their terms. The key here isn't whether you're virtual or you have it's not AI AI gives you much more information. Using voice gives you a lot more. A voice compared to any other form of, text or visual gives you way more information because you can tell how, a lot about where the customer's from and how they're feeling. But also you want to get to the point so you've got to think about meeting them where they want, right? And you've got this massive change where people are willing to be, do, some kind of video conferencing or chat. And it's not just about, here's one of the things that people need to think about, is that consumers in general are thinking more globally. They want your business to stand for something higher. So one of the things about being virtual is that you actually have a smaller carbon footprint. I know a company up in New Hampshire, they had security. They have the security for their presentations that they support, to your point, Andrew, they support the banking industry. So the banking industry, people all go face to face because they trust people. But during COVID, everybody was locked down. Mm-hmm. And a certain amount of that is going to stay that way because each one of these major financial institutions has a commitment to reduce their carbon footprint. Mm-hmm. And the second, related to that from a business perspective is that what you have to think about, and I've seen this happen, is that you have to think about how do you diversify your revenue stream. You can't just have one revenue stream. You have to think about how do we adapt and use some of these other pieces to bring in and diversify it, right? Which it can be different revenue streams, but you also have to look at your customer across their whole lifetime, right? You want to have better onboarding, better retention. Yeah. Which means you have less customer turnover and greater customer lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, I think like with all these things, you've got to take the lessons and look at it from a positive perspective. We're talking more about hybrid type scenarios, whether that's in, the office, people are going to be more flexible unless you work for some of the big investment banks like JP Morgan, where they say everyone has to be in the office, and there's very different ways of approaching it. But I think you've got to go with the, with the learning from it and look positively. Jeanette, what about you in terms of trends? What are you seeing in this sector?
I think there is an inevitable trend is that a lot of the C-suite is aging out and millennials are taking over more and more leading positions, and their behavior as digitally savvy from a very early age on determines also how you approach the entire situation. And this goes to, Hiedi, what you said, the customer behavior has changed, not just because of COVID, it also changes because of natural progression, people getting older. A generation now follows into big decision-making positions that are digital natives, and also are very used to the image of being influenced by somebody who has a footprint, a digital footprint, or an opinion, or somebody they follow. One of the trends that I see that I don't like is that people with heft or with digital influence are turning off their connection button on LinkedIn, for example, and they just want to be followed. That to me is just why. Then you're no better than any brand who doesn't want to be talked to. So you want to be followed, you want to be listened to, you want to have a one-way conversation, but you don't want to hear the other end, the very people that make you big. That to me is a trend that I don't really appreciate, just to not only see the positive things.
Fair enough. What about you, Sarah-Jayne?
No, I completely agree with Jeanette and Hiedi. And I think it's really interesting what you said about switching off, to sort of basically become a brand in yourself and let's just follow you. I think that's such a mistake, really. But ultimately, I think the biggest shift, I suppose, I've personally witnessed has been what I would call a shift to an anti-marketing vibe in influencer marketing B2B, because we used to be basically in the early days, given a brand message, they weren't sure, they had their budget, they'd pay you, we want these results, this is a message we want put out there. Now it's become anti-marketing, and by that I mean it is so much more of a conversation. You're having a conversation, you're not saying, read this report and get these results for your business. Click, sponsored by, blah, 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 blah. It is, oh, wow, I found this really fascinating because I did. Yeah. And this is what I found fascinating, maybe a quote and a link. So I think there's a shift to a more conversational, probably brought about by our, the pandemic and being in and shifting the way that we relate, because we actually want more conversations today. So I think, and the brands are understanding this. They're not so nervous about
more of a dialogue rather than a monologue. And
they're not so nervous about it. Whereas I think they used to be more rigid. I think there's a definite shift to this flow of conversation. Let the influencers share their personalities, what they liked. Maybe they didn't like the whole report. Maybe they liked section 2. Okay, but let's talk about that in a real way.
Exactly.
So when I say anti-marketing, I think that is probably a strong term, but I think it's moving that way.
And I think the good thing is it's more meaningful. I know we're coming to sort of the last 5 minutes. Sorry to sort of cut in there, but one of the questions come through from Keith Lewis saying that within larger corporations, where do you think the influencer works its best? Is it marketing, communications? Is it directly with CEO or CMO? What do you think?
I don't think there's one answer to that, Keith. I think you're working as part of a brand story across the board, and that's everybody from the people that buy it through to the people at the top, and everybody has to be on board with the conversation if the story is going to be told right. So that would be my answer.
I would agree with Sarah-Jayne, and I think there's a great example of that is going back to the early days of blogging. IBM within 72 hours created a set of social media guidelines, and they empowered everybody in their organization to blog. And the idea being that, it goes to Sarah's point. I wouldn't call it, I must say I argue with the idea of anti-marketing. It's the fact that your brand is owned by your customers. It's no longer that the corporation owns the brand. It's owned by everybody. And the fact is that IBM recognized the fact that some of the people, who do I trust? It goes back to that research. I trust the people who are on the front line who understand the product. And CEOs are often seen as being too far. They do better than, let's say, government leaders and religious leaders, etc. But unless it's my CEO, not trusted as much as, let's say, your people who are on the front lines. And I think it goes across your corporation.
I think that's right. I think it's got to come from the top down. I think it's got to be, okay, we're talking B2C, but a brand like Patagonia, the CEO of that company is extremely passionate about sustainability. He invests millions in making amazing films about, the fishing industry and how bad that is, et cetera, et cetera. So I think once you've got someone who is there and a thought leader in that space, it helps within the organization to have that outlook. Look, guys, we're coming to the end now of the session. It's been fascinating. Love to hear all your amazing views. But let's finish on your one thought about the future for B2B influencer marketing.
Shall I go first? I just think it's going to become far more inclusive. I think the lines will be blurred. I think the fact that the word influencer, it will just be, I would call it trusted communications rather than influencer marketing. It's like that person that you can rely on for the best source of information, and it will become just more driven by the world we live in now, the fact that we're all connected all the time, and we're comfortable with that. And I think there'll be more connectivity. Yeah,
beautiful. Yeah. What about you, Jeanette?
I think with the proliferation and professionalization of digital processes and online usage, I see only a bright future with hiccups. Let's put it that way.
Perfect. I mean, I always say the one thing you're guaranteed about predicting the future is you're going to be wrong, but it's to what you get it wrong. Heidi, over to you on that note.
Okay, so I'd say that I agree with what Sarah-Jayne and Jeanette said. Nothing is going to go smoothly, but here's the thing. I think it's going to continue to mature. And the businesses that are already there, new businesses that come into the B2B space who are starting to find their place, are going to have to niche down. You're going to have to find a place where you stand out as being number one. You've got to think about how you fit into your whole set. You've got to not only be looking at your competitors and peers, you also have to look at close substitutes and competitors, as well as large people who can come in all of a sudden. Who would think of Amazon as becoming, it's not just a global store anymore. It is like one of the biggest providers of technology.
It's a utility, absolutely.
And I would say that's related to that is the increase in voice, right? Voice in terms of, let's say, virtual assistants, chatbots, IVAs, which are intelligent voice assistants, are only going to become a bigger part, which means that from a marketing perspective, you need to think in terms of meeting your customer where, when, and how they need you. Absolutely. Context matters. So, for example, if I'm working at home and 5 o'clock comes and my family needs me, how else am I going to time, it makes a lot for time shifting and talking about what kind of device, right? How many people do you talk to these days on their smartphones where they're doing something else, but they're on a business call on their smartphone?
Absolutely.
And the last one is, I'm going to say that it goes across formats. You need to provide not just text and content, you need to provide the kind of information your customer needs, when, where, and how they need it. So, for example, I think voice AI really can break through here because, for example, I mean, the big examples are, how do I use these tools, right? If I'm not used to it, how do you help me onboard and use them as quickly as possible? And if I need to have my hands free or my eyes free, you need to provide that kind of a piece. So format and distributing it and staying visible are really critical.
Excellent. Thank you, Heidi, to end on that note. And I just want to thank you guys. I think we've gained some fascinating insights on the various aspects of B2B influencer marketing, some great lessons for the future to maximize return on investment. So I just want to end on saying thank you to Heidi, Sarah-Jayne, and Jeanette.
Oh, thanks, Andrew. It was great fun. Loved it.
Awesome, guys. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. Loads of great insights from all of you. So thank you, Andrew, for sharing this.